not only in terms of, what to do with refugees, but in terms of what the root causes are, in terms of, politics and acknowledging the governments that are frankly, and clearly not democratic, and the reason why we have so much political persecution. However, I feel like all of the US or EU or UN sanctions or, oppositions are mainly focused on the Middle East. So I feel like Africa's still dodged in terms of what the root causes are and what we can do in terms of acknowledging that we truly do not have democracy or human rights, and that is what people are fleeing from, and what can we do? My other question or comment is also related to the root causes in terms of opportunity, and I feel like creating a legal migration to promote opportunity to refugees so that they can have the opportunities that they don't have in their home countries counterproductive, because I feel like what we should do is create that opportunity. And what are we doing to create that opportunity to these people that are fleeing because of the lack of opportunity and economic problems? My other question directed to Dr. Tafara is, what can the African diaspora do? I feel like there's limited information for the African diaspora that are, Ethiopia, DC is highly concentrated with Ethiopians, but how many Ethiopians participate in what to do for Ethiopian refugees or asylees or whatnot, and same with EU and whatnot.
Thank you.
I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm struck with how closely related your first two comments were. The lack of opportunity relates certainly to the lack of democracy and human rights. Could we have the next comment over here? And thank you.
This morning's session is about a crisis. So what we're really discussing is emergency management and governance. Well, these situations didn't just pop up all of a sudden. Syria, the reason why Syria is in the crisis that it's in now, it started as a drought. There was a drought. The people went to the government. The government said, we can't help. So then it evolved into where it is today. So if governments can't cope because they have some emergency, internal emergency, like say drought in California. California can't cope. California calls for help. Congresswoman Bass is from California. And California can't cope with its drought. What if it couldn't call someone else for help? So my question is, we have the AU. Muammar Gaddafi proposed an African bank. Now, he proposed this bank. Shortly after he proposed this bank, he was killed. So, who can these countries, when they are faced with these emergency situations, you call them crisis, how do they manage with no help?
Thank you for your question. I'd like to welcome Representative Sheila Jackson Lee and invite her if she would like to make some remarks. Certainly, please.
Good morning. My name is Tukujalo. I'm from the Gambia. The CEO of the Senegambia Democracy and Governance, representing youth migrations from the Gambia as a Gambian. And I would like to thank Congress Bass once more for inviting me to attend the session, and I'm thanking you, the panelists. Welcome, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee. This summer I visited their camp in Mulheim-Baden in Germany, whereby you have migrants from the Gambia, and the youngest was 18 years old. Just to endorse the general statement, I saw these kids living in a very horrible place, living in trailers. my heart broke and I cried.
Where was this? It was Germany, you said?
Mulheim, Biden.
Oh, okay.
80 of them living in a camp, living like sardines in tin, which is very horrible and sad. My suggestion for this program is like building knowledge banks, timely across to live at risk, and providing relevant information will boost knowledge about preventive dangers. More documentation produced during direct encounter with affected persons and key stakeholders will serve as resources of primary knowledge required for wider sharing. Lack of vital knowledge about what lies ahead is likely responsible for most ventures like this. Before getting to know that life is not always green overseas. Some of those taking such risks are of wrong motion that once you land in Europe soil, everything goes fine. Country of origin intelligence sharing. Part of the problem why without employable skills, young people venture into perilous deep sea journeys to Europe as high risk, including potential life loss, is due to unadmirable conditions in their country of origin. Intelligence gathering about geographical realities compelling such risk moves will be helpful to great extent. Contacts will be established with relevant government agencies and organizations where support may be handy for the particular bracket of society at risk. Regular consultations will be maintained. Our rationale for intervention at stakeholders organization, my experience as the executive director of the SENGO, serve as a springboard and key motivation for taking on this risk. As migrant from the Gambia who settled in the US by the IMO, has compelling reason not to just to share my experience, but also walk an extra mile in saving lives by preventing intervention, aware of factors and drive young persons to risk their lives and mean family saving just to travel abroad is our belief at Sengo that could be done at once.
Thank you very
And
much.
I thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you. It's important to hear the perspective of migrants. Would you like to take the microphone, Representative Jackson Lee? Thank you. And then we'll come back to our last question, last two questions. And these will be the last two questions. So. Is there just one? Oh, okay. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me thank you very much to all of the panelists. Many of you I've interacted with, and let me thank you for your service, which is enormously important. Let me as well thank my colleague, and now we call dear friend, Congresswoman Karen Bass. We have a common DNA and spirit about the continent, and I'm delighted of her leadership as the ranking member on the Africa Subcommittee. I call her sister, and we've traveled the same journeys together. I've been engaged in the issues of the continent for more than the years that I would like to count. I see out the corner of my eye a dear friend who would probably stand up and give the numbers of years that we have engaged in the continent and have seen a number of the challenges. I come from a district that had as my predecessor the Honorable Congressman Mickey Leland, who is deeply rooted in African soil and lost his life, for those who are from Ethiopia, during the deep drought that found Somalians and others in valleys without food. And Mickey died delivering food to Ethiopia. And so we have had a strong connection. I studied in Africa, went to school in Africa, and believe that this is very important meetings that we are holding. I want to ask the question and then just say a few points, and as we say in our places of worship, go to my seat. Congresswoman Bass, in her commentary, asked the question, where are the Africans? And used as an example, I believe, the 800 Africans that drowned in the Mediterranean Sea. And that means that this meeting today is a life-saving meeting, of which you look to us for, certainly for, if you will, solutions as members of the United States Congress. I intend to introduce a bill that talks about establishing a victims fund for those who have been impacted by terrorism, which creates internally displaced persons. And I'm going to look at the language to include may be the components of migration, because they too are victims. They have not been killed yet, but they're fleeing because of the conflictedness of their area. And so I hope that we will be reaching out to the Congresswoman. I hope that we'll be able to move this legislation. And the nexus is that I'm on the Judiciary Committee, the ranking member on the Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, and the seized dollars that we're talking about are under the jurisdiction of the United States Department of Justice. I think the real question is where those dollars are, and I don't want you to immediately say, are they holding dollars and not? No, I think they're in a probing to be able to discern where these billions of dollars are. They've been used by nameless, but you know the names, dictators over the years. So let's have an action item that indicates, and that's a small action item in the larger picture, because as I was given this statistics, and I thank the Africa Subcommittee for this statistics, the 3% of those fleeing are from the Boko Haram, if you will, catastrophic incidences, which include Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon. All of those countries are fighting, and to the credit of President Buhari, who've made a definitive statement about, one, getting rid of Boko Haram by the end of December, and we are all in the mix of supporting both his statement and our president's statement, which I think generated from their meeting, statement in action, since we were aware of some of AFRICOM's work in that area, but to send troops there to be of help. But at the same time, we know that countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Eritrea, Ethiopia, the Gambia, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, and I know that some others will raise their hand, are facing the strains of internally displaced persons. I've worked on those issues when I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee and introduced legislation that we got portions of it passed, and will say to you, now is time to rise up again and ask the question, where are the Africans? And be able to add to it the challenge to the United Nations in particular, and to emphasize both with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, which indicates nearly 60 million people have been displaced worldwide, in part the armed conflict, to emphasize a component dealing with the continent of Africa, inasmuch as it being sometimes so far from water and so far from resolution. So I leave you with these two solutions as you finish your questioning. Where are the Africans and where are the solutions? I frankly believe, having visited the African Union with Congressman Bass when we traveled with the President, is that we must bolster up the African Union. So if I'm going to get in trouble, I will get in trouble. And when I say that, that is a question that I think was asked. Where is the unified entity? There's no better unity than the organization that has all of the states there. Now, someone will tell me that there is a migration refugee component, but it is not enhanced, it is not strengthened, it is not known. That is the kind of structure that we can, and forgive me for using these terminologies, each period of my life I've got new terms, so pouring into the vessel, that we can pour into, both in terms of legislation, in terms of funding, where the lead entity are the countries themselves, where presidents sit and realize that you can't always have Nigerian refugees and people migrating always to Europe. You must, in your own space, be able to welcome them, albeit temporarily, because then it allows them to return, which many people want to do. There are obviously people who want to go to Europe, and I see the European Union is represented, and we've interacted often, and so that component needs to be coordinated between the African Union and the United Nations. That speaks to the entities that represent Europe. And Europe understands, I hope, without misspeaking, that they too will have to reorder their thinking about people of color, to be able to welcome people of color, by and large, eager to be self-sustaining people once they travel to Europe. But I believe that we must ramp up with a special focus because the migration is continuing, because the various terrorist entities, which are basically the basis now of migration, not so much the fleeing from lack of sustenance as it was when Mickey was dealing with the whole drought and lack of food, and people would move to try to find food and water. And I've been to some of those camps that were dealing particularly with the food crisis. That is still a pending crisis. But I would like to leave you with the idea that we look to the coordination more so, not hearing the presentation from the representative ambassador thanking him for his service from the European Union, knowing that they're doing a lot, but I believe coordination with a ramping up of the African Union and their responsibilities and order, and then working with the United Nations and their refugee resettlement on recognizing that there may be special needs, special structures dealing with the African population that is fleeing. We are brothers and sisters, and I hope that as we work together, the people that are in devastating conditions as we stand here today will find a hand reached out to them, not as the handout, but the hand up. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much, Representative Jackson Lee, for those inspiring words and for your activism on behalf of Africans in general and African refugees in particular. We have one final question, and I'm delighted that we are able to get to every question.
Hi, my name is Tam Radmadin. I'm the publisher of LittleEthiopia.org. I'd like first of all to say thank you to the congressman to initiate this very important serious problem that is facing the African community. And also I'd like to congratulate you and Representative Sheila Jackson to meet your ancient ancestor Lucy in Addis Ababa last July. It was amazing. So we put on our webpage yesterday to recognize you that you were in Ethiopia, and thank you very much. That was really very, very important because he's the first African American president to visit Ethiopia, the only sitting president. So it is an amazing historical event. We are doing a lot of things related to that, and we'll contact you as we discussed earlier. I think today Dr. Tafarra has really touched the most important point, and we have to concentrate on that issue. Because I was involved in the 1970s when we were the first refugee crisis started in Ethiopia, when we had a dictator came to Ethiopia and overtook, and a number of Ethiopians have to come. And it took us almost 8 years to be part of the legalization process. These things take a long time. Mind you, we're talking about 20 to 30,000 Ethiopians, but this is huge. So as he suggested, that is very, very critical. But there are also issues which we have to address. How are we going to deal with Eritrea? How are you going to deal with Somalia? And how are we going to deal with Sudan? So that has to be studied. The other important issue which I have been talking with the officials of the United Nations and African Union and the other, there should be somewhere a point where someone wanted to leave his country. There should be a point where they have to stop chasing them. If they stop chasing them, this crisis will not happen. They will not have to jump to the ocean to die. So that's what I say, and that's a very great point, and we have to work on it. And thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank you all for your very sort of lively participation and your excellent questions. And we are within a minute of our time limit. So I'd like to just ask our panelists if they have one thing they would like to leave us with, and I'm sorry we don't have time for a fuller response.
Very quickly, harsh and worsening climate conditions, lack of opportunity, lack of education, lack of hope, and weak and fragile and sometimes downright bad governments is a toxic combination that is causing people to move. There is no one solution when you have such a complicated mix of factors prompting people to move. But this is why the full range, from diplomacy to development to relief aid, has to be brought to bear on these tricky situations. We are so grateful to members of Congress who support our programs, and we've had bipartisan support for the humanitarian aspects of what we do. The commentator who talked about drought as the basis for what happened in Syria was right on target, that these are very complex situations with roots that go in several different directions. The UN, the International Humanitarian System, the International Committee of the Red Cross Movement, NGOs will all be coming together in May at a World Humanitarian Summit to see if there are better ways to be doing what we should be doing. So you should all be aware of that. But I want to give special thanks to Congresswoman Jackson Lee for reminding us of Mickey Leland and how he gave his life as he was building a bridge, as he was an American who cared, as he was out there trying to make a difference. There is a memorial to him at the embassy, and I had forgotten, and I saw the memorial, and it all hit me that, you know, this is what we got to do. We got to get out there. We got to take those risks. We got to make sure that we connect and make things happen. So thank you for giving us that inspiration to keep going in his following him.
Well, firstly, I would once again like to thank Senator Congresswoman Bass for organizing this, for the opportunity to bring a European perspective. I think it's very clear from everything that's been said, and I can agree entirely. I think Anne has summed it up very well. This is a multidimensional problem. You start with a migrant who turns up on your doorstep looking for asylum status, but then you work back through everything that has got that person there and the people who didn't make it there and what's happening elsewhere in the world. So it's going to require considerable ingenuity to address all the dimensions of this in an integrated way, because our systems don't always function in that way. From a European perspective, if I may just echo or emphasize the fact that Africa is a hugely important focus for our foreign policy, whether that is in terms of development assistance. Africa is by far the biggest recipient of European Union development assistance, humanitarian assistance, trade. We've just recently concluded trade agreements giving all the countries of sub-Saharan Africa duty-free, quota-free access to the European market, foreign policy, and migration, and cooperation with the African Union, which is a very important pillar of our relationship. To the point that was made earlier, who do you call when there's a crisis? I think this is one of the great challenges of the 21st century. What is the balance between the responsibility of the international community to intervene in a country when you think something's going wrong and the respect of sovereignty? And this goes to the heart of how we're going to manage the 21st century. And it's not just to do with Africa, it's to do with other parts of the world. It's a huge responsibility for the EU and the United States as very important guarantors of global values, but we have to work with other partners who don't necessarily share those values, Russia, China, and other countries. And this, to me, is going to be something that's going to require increasing international discussion, because we cannot just stand idly by when things go terribly wrong in a country. But on the other hand, there are international laws, there are rules about how you can intervene, when, and that's going to be a big challenge.
Thank you very much. Tahai, last word, brief word.
Thank you. I want again to thank Congressman Bass and Jackson for their ongoing support in the African refugee immigration and development. I think one of the things that we need to do is to create public awareness. And the African community in the diaspora has to own this. You were in that situation one time, rather. You are in a better situation to influence, to create public awareness in this country. One of my sisters asked earlier, what can the African diaspora do? This is exactly what he can do. You can create awareness. We are living in a country where the grassroots movement makes a difference. It's always from the bottom up. And you have to be part of that process. This is something that we all can do. While we all think about the long-term solutions, creating democracy, positive governance, and so on, I think there are immediate things that we can do. As I said earlier, there are a large number of refugees who have been in a protracted situation. We need to pay attention to these people before it becomes too late for them and their families. We have people in countries that have no possibility of integration. We need to pay attention to this. I might also mention here, for example, the Eritrean refugees, about 39,000 of them in Israel. There is no possibility for them to be integrated there. The Israeli government has made it very, very clear. I hope the State Department will pay attention to that and find an immediate solution. There are a large number of Ethiopians and other Africans in the Sudan, in Kenya, protracted. We need to, South Africa is a country where I would like us to pay attention. The anti-immigrant sentiment that has existed for many, many years now in South Africa, we need to do something about that. And I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks to all our panelists, and particular thanks to Representative Bass, whom I would like to invite to make any final remarks. You're going to refrain. We are all very much in your debt for bringing us together for this conversation, which has been really an excellent one. Thank you.